June 20th, 2033, Stony Brook University Hospital and Research Center. Even though this is going to take 4 to 6 hours, David, it will feel like an hour/hour and a half. The first half hour you will spend waiting for it to kick in, and, once it does, the changes that begin happening to your mind will throw off your sense of time. Just be aware. It will be painful, but at least it won't feel like 6 hours of pain. Dr. Sandstrom patted my shoulder. We will be keeping an eye on you through the one-way mirror, but we will leave you alone unless you request us, as this is a very private moment. Just say or yell doctor and we will come in. If you can't speak, cross your arms. Got that? I nodded. I was feeling warm and probably sweating. I see you are perspiring. That means you have about 20 minutes until everything begins. So, just relax here on the couch and daydream about your new life. That will make the pain seem worth it. Good luck, David. I know you will be happy, a very happy 8-year-old girl. He shook my hand, patted my shoulder and left. I lay out on the couch, a nice cool synthetic nano-weave washable polyester couch that felt like suede, and let my mind wander. The open back of the hospital gown was nice on the cool nano suede. I imagined that the hospital gown was a dress, and that I was finally able to wear a dress in a feminine body and not my horrible mannish figure. I finally would get to try on little wedge sandals and shoes, and then wear them to parties and events. And then I could kick them off and run around with the other children outside in the grass. I would be able to kiss little boys on the cheek and giggle. I was going to have a daddy who would pick me up and love me like I was his whole world. I was going to have an older sister to show me the ropes. Later on in life, I was going to be able to have babies. This is what I had wanted since I was 12 and understood what women could do that men couldn't. Finally, behind me would be all those years of looking at my body in the mirror and hating it, all those years of wanting to try girls' clothes, but fearing my mother's wrath. She would turn over in her grave if she knew that it was her life insurance policy, the one that she worked so hard as a single mother to pay for, that was funding this change. And I would feel bad about this if she hadn't spent the 21 years of my life she was alive trying ram down my throat how horrible men had been to her. She didn't want me to turn out like my absentee father, and I am pretty sure that by age 5 I didn't want to be a boy anyway. But the few times I brought up the topic, she told me that I would just have to bear the curse that God had given me. Now I would be able to be the girl I had always wanted. I imagined myself going clothes shopping with my new mother and big sister, and I could not wait. I also could not wait to get rid of my male genitalia. I remembered those embarrassing and frequent erections in gym class in 6th grade. It had taken until 10th grade before people stopped saying "watch out, Bonerman has arrived," when I walked into the locker room. Bonerman had lasted longer than the other nickname I'd earned based upon an untrue rumor that I'd pleasured myself in the locker room, Sticky Martin. This occurred at a time when Ricky Martin tried a late career revival, and so for 7th and 8th grade I, David Martin, endured that nickname. Thinking happier thoughts, I visualized all the catalogs I had gone through looking for clothes in my new size to be, 4 feet 0 inches and approximately 50 pounds. I wasn't allowed to know much else about my donor, other than that her DNA had been thoroughly vetted for rare genetic diseases, she was a healthy and active girl, and that she got good grades in school. Her grandparents had donated her DNA after she and her parents were killed in a tour bus bombing in London. Religious extremists did not approve of this DNA-altering process, dealt as it is called, so ever since dealt was legalized in the US we were considered unholy. I was practicing, in a whisper, my new name Allison Sarah Mason, Allison Sarah Mason. When I realized that, suddenly, the building warmth I had been feeling had reached unbearable. I got up off the couch to get some air moving inside the gown and looked at the 3D TV on the wall. I had been halfway watching Channel W, and the show I was watching on the reinvention of Venice, Italy after global warming was whipping by quickly. I was stunned to realize that the process must have begun and muttered "oh shit" as I hurried over to the one-way mirror on the wall. My eyes had started to change color. They were some mix of brown and hazel, and it seemed like I could see the colors changing slightly as I watched. My light brown hair was falling out in clumps, and new blonde hairs were growing in behind them. The same was happening with my eyebrows, eyelashes, and, from the feel of it, my body hair. I had to see what was happening to me, so I yanked on the hospital gown until the pressure-sensitive tabs on the back gave way and I was looking down at myself. Sure enough, my body hair had fallen out and a minimal amount of blonde hairs had started to grow in, mostly just on my arms. I walked awkwardly over towards a full-size mirror over by the dresser, stumbling once. I looked down at my feet, and something looked strange about them. The toes looked a bit shorter, and the toenails looked different, like they were someone else's feet. I didn't make it to the full-length mirror as pain in my feet made me collapse forward onto my hands and knees. Both feet felt like a pair of monster hands were massaging them painfully, crushing them. Being on my hands and knees, I couldn't see them. An itching began in my fingers, and I watched mesmerized as the fingernail beds began to change shape and the fingers seemed to shorten a bit. Suddenly I was reminded of the movie American Werewolf in London, where the main character transforms into a werewolf in his girlfriend's living room. They had played that on Channel W's non-3D retro night. Two pains hit me at once, pain in my hands from their change of shape and size beginning, and the brutal pain I had been warned about. My internal organs began to reshape, resize and rearrange themselves to fit in a smaller, female body. I fell over on my side at the pain, which far overshadowed the pain in my hands. It's hard to explain what it feels like to have someone cut you open and start squishing your organs with their hands and rearranging them, but that's the best I can describe it. I curled up there for what seemed like 10 minutes until I felt the oddest tug at my groin. I rolled over onto my back and looked down. My body was pulling my male genitalia inside of it slowly with an unpleasant, but not painful, constant tugging feeling. My body, as I had also been warned, had now had its fat reserves decimated by the transformation process, and I looked like a hairless, anorexic version of myself. I knew my body would now feed off the excess bone, tendon, muscle, and skin that I would need to shed as my size diminished. I could see my feet were tinier now, and my leg muscles had started to thin. Somewhere in the back of my head I was excited about the different types of shoes I could wear now. The internal organ pain in my torso was subsiding a bit. I rolled over onto my hands and knees again, and was going to get up when the headache came on. There was pain on the outside and inside of my head, and I was becoming disoriented. I remember those moments still where I thought I had been kidnapped by aliens and was being tortured, and then I just didn't know who I was. The yelps of pain that came out of my mouth were not male or female at that point, and that just added to the confusion of who I was and what was happening to me. Suddenly there was what I can only describe as a lurch in my consciousness, and then I was back to knowing who I was and what was happening, but I was far more scared of it and the odd cries from my throat than I had been before. The pains in my head subsided a bit like the pains in my torso, and in both those areas I could feel things shifting and pushing. I tried 3 times to get to my feet, and when I did finally it was a rather surreal process of walking on feet too small for the frame they were carrying. When I got the mirror, I saw a much smaller head covered in blonde hair that reached my neck. The face still held traces of me, but it was much more like the face of my donor in the photos I had seen. My torso was a mess of shape. Everything seemed awkward as I watched it change. Arms, shoulders, collarbone, ribcage, stomach and hips were all decreasing unevenly from each other. As I watched, transfixed, they all grew smaller and began to even out in their rate of change. For a moment, I felt a tug in my groin again, and small folds of skin took shape as where there had been seemingly nothing moments before. I felt excitement that almost covered over the terror that had been growing in me. It took me what felt like a few minutes to realize that the whimpers and groans I emitted unconsciously were now sounding adult feminine. I felt more excitement, and I wanted to cry. It was then I realized that everything around me looked slightly different. The hospital had tape lines on the wall next to the mirror with a sticker next to each line that told you your approximate height if you were eye level with that particular line. I stepped up to it and read the sticker in front of me. Eye level with this line is approximate 5 feet. I had dropped 9 inches and had another foot to go. At this point there was just pain everywhere, but not fierce. Everything in me was moving, changing or shrinking in one way or another. I watched myself in the full-length mirror, swearing I could see myself shrink and my hair grow. When my hair reached my shoulder blades, I walked up to the lines again, thinking it had been only 7 or 8 minutes since I last checked my height. When I looked straight ahead, I was looking at the line for 4 feet 8 inches. Something in that number struck fear in me. I don't know why, but now I was below the height of even a very short adult woman. I felt myself sob, and it sounded like the sob of a little boy to me. I started to hyperventilate a bit, realizing that I didn't want to be 4 foot tall. I would be helpless at 4 foot tall. I reached out with my hands to touch the line on the wall to make sure it was real, but my memory of how far I should reach to touch the wall was off. My hands didn't reach at first until I stepped closer. I looked at the hands, my hands, and they weren't right, but they were paler and just had a tiny hint of blonde hairs on the backs of them. They were petite, and that scared me. I felt helpless. I felt betrayed by my own desires, left helpless by them. I felt my chest start to heave in what would be a scream or a sob. In the mirror, I could see the 3D TV flashing programs rapidly by. A voice went by me very quickly several times until I heard it, almost artificial sounding, repeating the same thing over and over quickly. Say your new name. Repeat it over and over again. Say your new name. Repeat it over and over again. I thought it came from a speaker over the one-way mirror, but I was a bit disoriented. My head hurt fiercely again. What was my name? What was my name? I wanted Sarah. I wanted it be Sarah, but someone else wanted Allison. I couldn't remember who wanted Allison. Did David want that? Who was David? No, I was David. I am not David now. I am Allison Sarah Mason. The Masons had wanted Allison as my name, so Sarah was my middle name. My new parents wanted me to be Allison. I was going to have a mommy again, and finally a daddy, the Masons, and their other adopted D-alt daughter, Alexandra. I spoke aloud and closed my eyes. I am Allison Sarah Mason. I am Allison Sarah Mason. I repeated it for what seemed like 50 times, and my breathing calmed down as I listened to my voice change subtly every time from sounding like a little boy to a little girl. I could feel the size of my neck changing as my voice changed, my whole upper chest and neck tightening up and slimming. I opened my eyes, and I was staring at the tape line that said 4 feet 4 inches. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, and then stepped back to look in the mirror. I was definitely a little blonde girl with a skinny body, blue eyes, fresh pale skin and hair that went down to her lower back. There was no visual sign of David in me now. I smiled my new smile, and started repeating my new name over and over again as I watched my continued changes in the mirror. I loved my new voice, I loved my new smile, I loved my new hair. After what seemed like 5 minutes, I stepped to the tape lines again. 4 feet 2 inches. The 3D TV was moving much slower now, but still not normal speed. I looked at myself up close in the mirror and smiled at what I saw. I liked this me. I am Allison's Sarah Mason. I still could feel pain everywhere, but it was all lessening. As time slowed down and my head stopped whirling, I couldn't wait to get dressed again. I was cold now. I decided to close my eyes again until I could hear the 3D TV at normal speed. I just took normal breaths and whispered my new name for what seemed like minutes of eternity. My breathing slowed, and I tried not to think about anything other than my whispered name. I smiled at how small my whispers sounded. When a commercial for the series I had been watching earlier about Venice came on Channel W, I recognized the announcer's voice as sounding normal. I turned around and then opened my eyes. I felt hair slap against my naked butt when I turned. The time in the corner of the 3D TV was 4:17 p.m. We had started at 11:30 a.m. And I would swear it hadn't been more than an hour since it started. I turned around to look in the mirror and felt relief. No panic was in me now. I had done it. I walked up to the lines on the wall one more time, and with eyes held straight on, I was just below the 4-foot line by a tiny bit. My hair was almost completely covering my butt, and I could feel tingle across the skin on my back as I moved. Then I realized that the doctors could probably see me, so I bolted across the room and put on the smaller-sized gown that was laid out on the bed. When I had it on, the door opened and Dr. Sandstrom came in. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "Like a girl, silly." I answered, and smiled at him with a small laugh. "I know you feel like a girl, silly girl." Dr. Sandstrom laughed at his verbal fumble, and I went over and hugged him. It was so odd to realize how big he was compared to me now. I murmured thank you as he put his hands on my back and patted me while I hugged him. "Now," he pulled out of the hug, "how do you feel?" I felt tired, and every joint and muscle in my body ached. I told him as much. "That's to be expected, that's normal," he reassured me. "Now let's hop up on the bed here and the nurse is going to take your vitals and then I'll do a physical exam. Okay?" I nodded and stepped on a footstool built into the exam table and planted myself up there. The nurse seemed nice, but she didn't say much except the basic instructions for taking my temperature, blood pressure, blood oxygen levels, blood sugar, eye pressure, heart rate, height and weight. Dr. Sandstrom came back in, reviewing the results that had been wirelessly sent to his health tab. The nurse stayed in the room while Dr. Sandstrom began his exam and spoke to me. "Lie back, Allison, and take the gown off." He began to poke and prod me in a bunch of places. "So far, you seem like a very healthy little girl. All your levels and pressures are near perfect and you are in the lower 10th percentile in height and weight for your age, 3 foot, 11 inches and 47 pounds. You will probably always be a bit on the short side. You may end up at about 5'1" as an adult and your healthy weight will about 100 to 105 pounds. He had me sit up and listen to my heart and lungs with a DG Steph. "Everything sounds great. Now, we have to do a C8 mod scan and then you can eat, shower and get your hair cut to a manageable length if you'd like." "Cut my hair? No way, Dr. Sandstrom." "Well, we'll see how you feel about that after you shower and brush all that out." Felt so comforted by his presence, I just wanted to hug him again. I hoped I felt the same way about my new daddy. He let me get regowned and the nurse took me for the C8 mod scan. It was across the hall in the 10-room suite that housed this Dialt suite. We didn't even have to pass the nurse's station to get there. The scan only took a few minutes, and then she brought me back to my room where she said Dr. Sandstrom and another nurse named Debbie would be back in a minute. As she left, Dr. Sandstrom and the other nurse came in. "Hi, I'm Debbie." She put her hand out in greeting to me. I got a really positive vibe off her, and I felt a smile bloom on my face. I took her hand, again amazed how big adults were compared to me. "Hi, Debbie, I'm Allison. Are you here to help me?" "Why, yes I am," she said with a return smile. "Just as soon as the good doctor here finishes." Debbie was old enough to be my grandmother, and I liked that about her. I instantly trusted her. "Okay, Allison." I whipped my head around to Dr. Sandstrom's voice, and enjoyed feeling my hair move with it. "Your CAD/MOD scan was good, so we are going to let you eat, shower and rest for the night. If you remember what I told you before the process, you will still be undergoing minor changes overnight in your sleep. You won't notice much change, if any at all, when you wake up. But there will be changes going on slowly all night to your brain, muscles, and organs. Debbie is your nurse tonight, so if you need anything in the middle of the night, just hit the call button and she'll come to you. I am going to check on my other patients, so are you okay before I go?" I nodded and smiled. "Are you happy?" I beamed, nodded, and then hugged him again. "Okay, Allison, I will see you in the morning." Once he was gone, Debbie looked at me. "So, what's first? Shower or food?" "Food," I said goofily, put the back of one hand to my head and pretended to faint into the chair. "Oh, geez, a drama queen already," Debbie said with a smile. I giggled in the chair, and then stood up, holding my arms out in my hospital gown. "Well, a queen can't go to supper dressed like this, can she?" This was followed by another set of giggles from me. Debbie rolled her eyes playfully at me. "A little giddy, are we?" "Well, miss, there's a small lounge in this wing where we bring the food and the patients eat there. You only have to go down the hall." "Okay, but," I enunciated in a playfully ascending tone, "can I have some underwear and socks? My feet are cold on this floor, and I don't want to show my butt in the hallway because these gowns never close right." And finished with a small laugh as the word but seemed funny to me suddenly. She pointed at the dresser. "There are plenty of socks and underwear in that dresser. When you first signed up for the DEALT process, you paid us to have some clothes for your new body. They are all in the dresser and the closet." "Really?" I bolted over the dresser and found the drawers full of underwear, socks, slips, sweaters, t-shirts, and jeans. In the closet there were some dresses, shoes, pants, and other blouses. I wasn't sure I loved all of it, but it made me excited to see it and touch it all. "Can I try this stuff on?" Debbie put her hands up. "You're still a patient, dear, and that means you stay in a gown. Socks and undies are allowed, but until you go downstairs to the transition wing where you're just in more of residential setting, there will be no clothes. You can try some things on, but you can't keep it on." But, why?" I stammered and whined. "Because, until you're entirely stabilized and completely through the process, we need to be able to get to your body for procedures easily in case something goes wrong. The first 24 hours you are still not considered stable. So, in a day or two, you can move downstairs and dress up all you want. For now, get put on some socks and undies so we can go eat. Today's dinner menu for this wing is either spaghetti and meat sauce with a salad, or a pasta in a cream sauce. Both come with creamed spinach." "Yuck. Spinach." I pulled out dark teal socks and underpants that kind of matched the colors and the pattern on the hospital gown and started to put them on. I got a weird feeling when I pulled the underwear up and it was tight against my body. I had been wearing boxers for years, and to have nothing blocking the underwear from coming all the way up my crotch was weird. I got a thrill from knowing my male parts were gone. Hey, you have new taste buds, you never know. You may like spinach now, Debbie reminded me. I sat in the chair and put the socks on. Okay, I replied in a despondent tone, I guess the spaghetti and meat sauce. Debbie touched a wall panel where she accessed the hospital system and input my order. Then she turned back to me. Okay, we have 15 minutes. Now you and I have to talk about that hair, Mississippi. You're not cutting it. Honey, you have never taken care of hair that long before. I would like you to consider at least cutting the ends so that they're even, and that way you don't have to worry about sitting on it all the time. It's going to get really dirty every time you sit down. I didn't want to admit it, but I hadn't thought about that problem. I had already sat on my hair twice. I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. So, I tried a compromise. Can we cut it to just above my butt? I said in a cutesy, trying not to laugh at the word but again, voice. Yes, we can do that. Now let's go eat. It felt nice to take her hand and have her hold it all the way down the hall to the lounge. The Dialt wings at Stony Brook were fairly luxurious, and the TV lounge was no exception. Even my room, even though it had an exam table in it, would rival some Vegas luxury hotel rooms. Considering that the Dialt procedure had cost me most of my mother's $1 million life insurance policy and part of the proceeds from the sale of the 5 acres and 5-bedroom house in Babylon that had been passed down through 3 generations to me, the walls should have been made of gold as far as I was concerned. The last generation of my family to have money was my great-grandfather, who as president and owner of a savings bank had built the house in 1929. He died during World War II and my great-grandmother sold the very profitable bank. My great-grandmother, grandmother and my mother all lived off that money and its interest until about 15 years ago. Then my mother had to work, and we had lived paycheck to paycheck. My mother and I had barely been able to afford to heat and cool, never mind maintain, the big old house. Life here at Stony Brook Dialt was above my social status, and this procedure was usually only for the upper class. I really liked the feel of my little soft feet on the carpeted hall floor, and how big everything seemed. In an orientation video that we had watched with testimonials from other Dialt recipients, we were told that after a month or so our memories of our old perceptions of the size of objects would fade and everything seemed normal. Right now, everything seemed really big to me. Debbie guided me down the hall to the lounge by my hand, which left me free to look around at everything. As we passed the nurse's station, 2 of the younger nurse aides came out from behind the desk to see me. Oh my God, one of them explained, "You look great. What a cute identity you got." They both squatted down to be at my eye level, and they were those cute kind of girls that would not have spoken to me much when I was David. The other one asked me, "How do you feel, sweetie?" She put a reassuring hand on my upper arm. "Fine," I said kind of shyly, but with a smile because I was enjoying the attention. "Do you want me to come by and cut your hair later?" The second one said. "Maybe just a little bit." Okay, well, have no worries, I did go to hair design school before I went to CNA school. "We'll fix you up good. My name is Deanna." She was a very pretty girl with olive skin and dark hair that hung in tiny, tight curls. For work, her hair was tied back in a big ponytail, but it was still very well taken care of. I stuck out my little hand. "I'm Allison." She shook it, and I got a kick out of how big her hand felt. Thank you for offering to cut my hair. Oh. So polite. Well, I'll see you after dinner. Debbie and I waved goodbye to her and the other CNA. There were 9 other patient rooms in this hall besides mine, along with certain equipment rooms such as the CAD-MOD scanner room, supply rooms, linen room, and some other doors with no labels. All the doors were closed. I looked up at Debbie. Am I the first or done? No one else seems to be out. Yes, dear. You got your injection first, and since you were only 22 as David, your body was young enough to take the changes easily. I slapped my palm against my forehead and held it there. Oh, brother, that was considered easy? Those poor other people. I hope that Lady Lucille that I met at orientation is doing okay. Well, maybe she'll come out soon in her new identity. Do you know who she was becoming? She said her name would be Roland. I don't know much else. We weren't supposed to share a lot in case someone backed out. That way we would be identifiable in public to them in our new identities. Well, as far as I know, everyone's done all right. I am sure you will see Roland soon. The TV lounge was very well appointed, and it was more like a multi-purpose room. There was a large 3D TV and some couches, but there were also some very nice wood dining tables, smaller TVs in the back for gaming or internet usage, and behind a full glass wall on the far side of the room was a small workout area. When we entered the room, I felt an urge and went with it. I ran and jumped onto one of the nice, big couches, landing on my tush and bouncing a few times. Debbie looked at me scornfully. Do you think your new parents are going to like that new behavior, young miss? No. I said coyly, but they paid for their couches, so I would respect their furniture. I paid a lot of money for this procedure, so I think I should be allowed to act like a child and jump on the once. Well, dear. I can't entirely argue that point, but you did sign paperwork that held you responsible for damages. It's fine. I bounced up and down in place, strong as ever. Now where's the food? It'll be here shortly, sweetie. Now let's do a memory test while we're here and waiting. She pulled out her health tab and looked my records. Your new name? Allison Sarah Mason. Your former name? David Elias Martin II. Who was David named after? His great-grandfather, David Elias Martin. What is David's birth date? January 31st, 2011. What is your new birth date? May 26th, 2025. What is today's date? June 20th, 2033. Who was David's third-grade teacher? Mrs. Levins. Who is the current President of the United States? Thomas Ingram. What was the name of David's pet fish in first grade? Bubbles. Okay, perfect score on the questions you wrote. Now here are a few questions we pulled from David's records. Ready? To eat? I grinned at her. I am sure it is almost here. Just hold on. First question, what bank did David finance his car through? Chase Wells Fargo. Good. What kind of car was it? A 2025 Suzuki Kizashi. Good. What was the first job David had after high school? Delivery for. No, wait, he worked for 1 week at a real estate office filming the virtual house tours, but then he got fired and went to deliver pizza and subs at Ray's Italian. Good catch. What was David's major at Suffolk County Community College? Started as undeclared, changed it to business. Graduated with an associate's degree. What were David's mother and grandmother's middle names? Elizabeth and, Eliza? Good. Which one of David's mother's boyfriends was arrested at David's house? One? I laughed. Try two. The one who made me call him Father Guiding Spirit, I think his real name was Dan, and then I think the other guy was a druggie, maybe his name was Frank or Fred? She smiled, again, good catch. They were Daniel Lightfoot and Frank Newlin. Glad you could drag up those memories. What company did David's mother work for most of his life? Paulson Grocery Distribution. She was the truck dispatcher for the delivery trucks. Okay. What is the name of the lawyer who set up the college trust fund you with David's remaining money? Ibram Castillo. What did David get suspended for doing in 6th grade? Debbie raised an eyebrow at me. I giggled, sneaking in the girls' locker room and hiding in the closet. Debbie put down the health tab for a second and looked at me. Really now, did you? Well, I fidgeted. I wanted to find out what being a girl was all about, and my mother wouldn't explain puberty to me. She sighed, you poor dear. Well, now you'll get to find out firsthand. I know, I am so excited. I bounced on the sofa cushion a bit. Someone dressed in teal green scrubs brought in 2 trays of food at that moment. Food. Are you eating too? I asked Debbie. Of course, I am your transition nurse. I will be here until you move to the residential wing. I sleep when you sleep, I eat when you eat. A dish of pasta and spinach was slid in front of both of us, and Debbie got water to drink while I got milk. Debbie pointed at my milk. You want to drink plenty of that. Now you have to worry about osteoporosis in the future. I took hold of the cup, having to use 2 hands for the first time in years, and took a big sip. Milk tasted a bit different than I remembered, but I didn't really care. I dug into the spaghetti and meat sauce with abandon, having a wickedly hard time using the fork to twirl my pasta. Debbie watched me amusedly, but applauded when I finally got one nice roll on my fork. That's pretty good. You are adapting quickly, Allison. I sucked the last bit of spaghetti into mouth and gave her a saucy smile. All right, you, time to eat some spinach. It's very well prepared here. And you'll notice that you have supplements to take as well. Those are top of the line, designed specifically for what your body needs after the dealt process. I gleefully took the pills since they were tiny, but I approached the spinach with caution. I hovered my fork around all sides of it, determining what my best angle of attack would be. Predators like wild spinach would startle easily if frightened, so you had to build up a familiar presence with it before you made your move. Allison? What are you doing, young miss? Are you stalking your spinach while it's getting cold? I had scrunched down to eye level with the leafy greens and was poised with my fork to make the first strike. I was doing quality control? Sit up and eat. You should know how important eating this is. Oh, all right. I sat up in the chair and began eating my spinach. Surprisingly, it was quite good. I ate happily, kicking my legs that didn't reach the ground. I was still very sore, but felt a bit better since I had something in my stomach. Not so bad after all, is it? Asked Debbie. I shook my head and kept eating. Allison, may I ask you a question or two to satisfy my own curiosity? I shrugged. Dear, how do you plan to adjust to being 8 again? Why would you want to give up your adult freedom? Chewing my spinach thoughtfully for a minute, I gave her the best answer I could. Well, it's not really like I am going back to being 8 because I never really was 8. My grandmother died when I was 4 or 5, and by age 8 I was the one taking care of my mother. Her job was 6.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. She would be at work at 5 a.m. and get out at 11:30. And from noon until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon she was drunk or high, or spending time with her boyfriend of the month. By 7 or 8, I was the one putting her to bed. I made our lunches, I made my own dinner and even did some laundry. Was this every day? Around that time, yes. Later on she halfway got on the wagon thanks to one of her boyfriends. But for a year or 2 I was taking care of a lot of things. I finished off my spinach. So you are looking to have your second chance at childhood? I nodded once and, cheerily, said that sums it up. Well, in that case I understand wanting to have a childhood again, and, with good parents. I was the transition nurse for your older sister, Alexandra, 2 years ago. She still comes up here to visit me with her parents sometimes when she's downstairs for her annual physical. Oh. What's she like? Well, she's a very sweet girl, and she's been begging her parents for a sister for a year and a half now. She's adjusted quite well to her new life. Wow, she really wanted me? Well, being a adult child can be lonely, dear. Luckily, you'll be living in a family with a adult child already and in a school system that has several adult children, a few adult teachers and a adult superintendent. You've got a good deal going on. Your older sister paved the way for you. I know. I sighed happily at my empty plate. For the first time in my life, I feel like things are the way they are supposed to be. Hey, do we get dessert? Debbie pointed to 2 mints that were hiding under my plate. Those are some of the best chocolate mints out there, try them. I reached for and tried one, and it was quite good. Debbie ate hers and I finished off my second one. Having to reach for things on the table was one thing out of many I would need to adjust to. Back in my room after dinner I could hardly stay awake. Deanna had been in my room cleaning up the aftermath of my transformation. It was just my old hair and dead skin flakes I hadn't realized I had shed. Hey sweetie, you ready for a haircut? I nodded and she pulled a stool from next to the exam table over to the full-length mirror. I hopped up on it, and was glad that in the last 14 years since I was last 8 years old that bangs for long-haired girls had gone out of fashion. Losing the hair that covered my tush would be fine, but I was glad that I wouldn't have to cut the front of my hair. As Deanna worked, I felt my eyes getting heavy. Stay with me, sweetie, she said a couple of times. When she finished trimming the back of my hair to 1 inch or 2 above my waistline, and then brushed out my hair, she had me stand up and look at myself in the mirror. I nodded a sleepy approval, and then Debbie led me over to my bed. You've had a long day, Mississippi. Just rest and we'll get you showered up in the morning after Dr. Sandstrom visits you. Okay? I nodded agreement and climbed under the covers. I felt my head hit the pillow, and that's the last thing of consciousness I remember for that evening. Never before that night, or any night thereafter, have I dreamed like that. I replayed the whole transformation process in my head, but probably something closer to the actual speed at which it occurred. I remembered so much more detail in my sleep. At real speed, the moments when I first watched the changes begin with David's hair falling out and mine blonde hair growing in, were actually scarier and more exciting than I realized at the time. Watching it happen slower, I realized that those moments I was mesmerized by the hair and I had missed other changes. My feet had started their change then, and I had looked down at my body to see the missing hair everywhere but failed to notice the changes in my toes and feet. Also fading then were little moles/beauty marks/freckles David had on his skin, mostly on his forearms. As I had turned to make my way to the full-length mirror and stumbled, I had looked down to finally notice that my feet had begun to change, but I missed all the thoughts that were blazing through my head at that moment. I want this, I want this, I want this. But there was a strong feeling of terror underneath those words, running up and down my spine along with the tingling pain of the changes beginning. Now I saw in my dream that it wasn't just the pain in my feet that made me fall to my knees, but also there had been a brief flash of pain in my knees as something shifted and pulled within them for a moment. I probably could have withstood and stood through the changes in my feet, but it was my knees and the beginning changes in my leg muscles that brought me to the floor. When I had seen my fingers start to change, I hadn't noticed the fringe of blonde hair that was starting to drop in my peripheral. I hadn't felt the exquisiteness of the pain that came as my feet shrank and missed how each moment of it meant that I was closer to happiness. I remember being fascinated by the fingers starting their change, but at that moment I had missed that there were small moments where I forgot who I was and what was happening, but they were small moments even in real time. Those moments added to both the excitement and fear of what was happening. Reliving the moments of pain in real time when my organs began to rearrange themselves was horrible. David had gallbladder problems once, and the pain was just like that except it was throughout my entire torso. In my dreams I lay there on my side, barely able to keep my eyes open for what seemed like an hour, only looking occasionally at my hairless body as things underneath my skin were visibly moving. They moved slowly, but I could see them because my fat reserves were gone. My legs were tingling as muscle was eaten away. When I felt the pull in my groin and rolled onto my back, there was definitely terror in me. Looking down at the emaciated body, yes, I was excited at watching my genitalia being pulled in. But as I watched it happen, what raced through my head and made me shudder was the thought, this is it, this is it, this is it, no turning back, no turning back. The slow progress of my body's change was made more amazing by what I had missed during those moments. As I watched my male parts recede, I had missed that either my hips slightly widened or my thigh muscles decreased greatly in size, but the space where my receding parts were seemed to get wider. I knew then that I had to get back up and watch all this in the mirror. My feet didn't look at all like mine, and they had gone from David's size 10 to what I can only guess to be a size 5 and shrinking as I watched. Getting back on my hands and knees took more effort than I had realized. My arms and legs were shorter, and at those moments they were too small for the body they were supporting. The pain in my torso was far more bearable, but the tugging sensation was still going on up into my body. I was panting yes, 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 and my voice sounded a bit higher. That's when the head pain hit. During the transformation process, I was cognizant of losing complete touch with myself during these moments. But with the sped-up perception of time, I missed how panicked I had become. I really thought the pains in my head were incredible that only aliens could cause them, because I momentarily thought I was David and that I was back in my bedroom in Babylon and aliens were trying to make me look like them. I felt my brow slowly pushing back into my skull, and something was pinching my nose to a less formidable stance on my face. But the feeling and agony of my skull shaping and resizing was surreal. That's when I lost all track of who I was and what was happening. I am so thankful that moments seemed to pass quickly during the actual transformation, because in my dream it was horrible. I was still on my hands and knees, looking at a floor I didn't recognize, pain ripping all these different parts of my body. Looking underneath myself, I saw a body that neither seemed male or female, adult or child. I took one hand, which was painful to do as the muscles were all tense, and reached down to my crotch to see if I was male or female but found nothing there but smooth skin. I felt my other arm start to give way, so I put my searching hand back in place. I knew, or I thought I knew, I was human, but even my grimaces sounded ambiguous. I began to doubt my humanity, and became confused. There were no memories. I was here on this floor, and other than blonde hair definitely hanging in my view, there was nothing to tell me what I was. I began to breathe rapidly as my chest felt constricted and true fear rose in me. Why did I hurt? Am I being born? Am I being created? My jaw actually popped out of alignment for a moment as my head compressed and the jaw was behind. As it unhinged, I felt the psychological terror of becoming mentally unhinged. My world was this neutral carpeting that I could see, and pain. It was then that I realized that I knew what carpeting was, and that I knew what parts of the body were. My jaw and the skin on my face pulled in tighter, and that's when it all started to come back to me. I was being born, but not in the normal way. The major pains subsided to somewhat tolerable, and I was able, with slow, great effort, to stand after multiple failed attempts. I could still feel my head swimming and changing. Seeing myself in the mirror was horrifying for a moment, and then strangely comforting. My mouth was open, making little cries that were subtly changing pitch. I could see new, straight teeth in there. My face was probably 50% David and 50% me at that point. I was excited, truly, but my torso was so odd. My arms had shrunk, and they were sitting in shoulders and rib cage that were too big, but my hips and stomach had decreased in size so much that it looked like there was a balloon inside my chest. As the chest began to slowly deflate, that's when I felt the groin tugging again, and watched the folds of skin begin to form there. I was elated, but still scared. There really was no going back now, and that made me cry. This was real, and my cries reminded me of a woman's and not a man's at all. The realization that I was shorter came from the lines on the side of the mirror. When I saw that I was 5 foot tall, I was exhilarated. I had missed the height change completely, and that thrill momentarily wiped away the terror. As I stepped back and watched myself in the mirror, the hair grew slowly, and the continuing feminization of my features had been odd to watch. My ribcage still looked puffed out, and felt odd sensations underneath the pain as my female reproductive organs continued to settle in. I loved watching the elements of David disappear. It was like I was watching a nature show about the transformation of a caterpillar to a butterfly. My eyes were not yet blue, but some odd shade of blue-green which I wished I could keep. My lips were a bit puffier, my nose far more petite, my forehead and face shape far more feminine. Watching this all in my dreams was more breathtaking, as it happened so slowly. Every time I looked away from something for a minute, I could see the subtle differences when I looked back. I stepped forward, checked my height again, after what seemed like an eternity of subtle, slow changes, and saw that I was 4 feet 8 inches. I felt my terror return. I was a child again, and that scared me. What had I done? Why had I given up being an adult? I would have no freedoms. I put up a hand to push some hair behind my shoulder, and when I saw it I put it out in front of me and then reached out the mirror which I couldn't touch from there. My hand was so fragile, so pure, so vulnerable, and that I began to cry and hyperventilate. My cries sounded like that of a small boy lost and separate from his parents. I just felt my still seemingly too large chest heaving when I heard Dr. Sandstrom's voice, at normal speed in my dream, say your new name. Repeat it over and over again. Say your new name. Repeat it over and over again. I realized there was a tiny speaker over the one-way mirror, and that's where he was probably watching. I couldn't remember my name, and there was pain inside my head again. There was so much muddled in my head, and there was pressure on my skull again. I struggled through my names and who wanted what name, and it was so confusing until I focused on my new name and began repeating it. I closed my blue-green eyes, and slowly I repeated my name, which I realized was more like 100 times as my voice slowly changed. The shrinking size of my chest, shoulders, and neck was blissful, but painful. The bliss came along with the corresponding changes in my voice. Sounding like a little boy was one thing, but the sound of little girl's voice at my command was some kind of final sign to me. I could hardly contain myself. Opening my eyes and seeing I was 4 feet 4 inches was so satisfying. Seeing myself at that height would have been orgasmic if I were capable of having one. My face had finally settled, my hair was way down my back, and my body was done reshaping. If the process had stopped there, I would have been happy. I loved my face now, I loved my new little body, and I couldn't wait to dress up. My laughter and voice were amazing to me. That's when I was woken from my dream by a hand on my shoulder. Allison? Allison? Sweetie? It's 7 a.m., time to get up. I recognized Debbie's voice, and she stood over me smiling. Has it been that long already? I stopped at the sound of my voice and giggled. Yes, dear, it has. Let's get you showered and dressed. Washing long hair was a pain. Debbie reached her arms in the shower to help me, but I was on my own pretty much. By the time I actually got to wash and explore the rest of my new body, I was half distracted by the thoughts of cutting my hair down to shoulder length or to just below my chin. Those styles were not in fashion for kids or young adults, but I was thinking about maybe just cutting it so it was up to my shoulder blades when I realized that I had been washing my new body with soap and not even thinking about it. For some reason, I was obsessed with my feet. That's not the part of the body you would think a girl who used to be a man would be interested in, but as David, I had the misfortune of large feet as a young teenager that I eventually grew into. But before I had grown into them, I had tripped up the stairs in middle school so many times, assaulting the legs of the person in front of me with my textbooks, that some of the older kids had taken to tripping me in the halls and blaming it on my feet. My new feet were so small and petite that I just adored them in the shower. The toes were cute, and I wanted to paint my new little toenails and wear sandals to show them off. Admittedly, washing my new female parts was a bit surreal as my memories were trying to reconcile the sensations it remembered from the last time I had showered. It felt so different, but with Debbie checking on me through the curtain every few minutes, I decided not to linger. I also kind of giggled when I felt my little butt. I was cute and had that nice little shape girls had. I loved so much about this body. Debbie was saying something to me, and that's when I realized that I had been lost in my reverie. Sorry? I was distracted. She smiled, or so I could hear in her voice through the curtain, and sure you are, my dear. Now, I was saying how lucky you are that they came up with this silicate gel shampoo and conditioner. If you use it every day, your hair doesn't stick to itself. So you should have no real tangles or knots to comb out. Plus, it will always be nice and shiny. There will be a few tangles here and there, but it shouldn't be what we used to have to go through when I was a kid. I kind of liked that Debbie was giving me the when I was kid type speech. It really made me feel young again to hear those kinds of stories from a grandmotherly figure. I turned off the water and Debbie handed me a towel. I dried off in the shower and then stepped out with it wrapped around me. Out of habit, I had wrapped it around my waist, which made it drag on the ground. When I opened the curtain, Debbie made a motion to remind me that I should pull it up and cover my chest. Sorry, I forgot. Old habit. I adjust the towel upwards. Well, better lose that one real quick. You've got a year or maybe 2 until things start changing and you'll want to cover up. That thought struck me hard. Puberty in a year? I knew beforehand that some girls even started the signs of puberty at 8, but I figured that the odds were against it for me. But, truthfully, my body could start puberty tomorrow. I wasn't ready for that. That much I knew. I took a deep breath and went over to brush my teeth. Handling the toothbrush was odd with small hands, but I managed. Debbie watched me, and I guess she had seen the look on my face when she mentioned the towel. Worried about puberty? I shrugged as I had the toothbrush in my mouth. I had a feeling she was going to talk to me about it even if I had said I was okay with it, so the shrug saved me from having to talk with a mouth full of toothpaste. Well, dear, the statistics are that you won't see anything for at least a year. It's a rough time for some girls, but you're pretty and you'll probably be fine. Your DNA was scanned for anomalies, so everything will probably be fairly normal for you. But, it's part of being a woman, which is what you wanted, right? I nodded, making sure I still was brushing when she finished so I couldn't accidentally engage the conversation further and make her talk more about it. When she was done, I rinsed my mouth and then turned to her. Okay, let's brush my hair out. She handed me the brush from a shelf. Your turn to learn. Trust me, you've got it easy these days. I took the brush out in the main room where my little living room/bedroom was, and Debbie followed me. I brushed my hair in the mirror, admiring my looks while Debbie got out a new hospital gown for me. Today's gown had pink flecks in the white fabric, so she had picked out pink undies and socks for me. Can't I wear other clothes now? I whined up at her. No, Dr. Sandstrom told you this morning that you don't get to do that until you go down the regular residential rooms. Later on today we'll let you try on some outfits for fun, but as long as you're a patient up here you're in a gown most of the day. Are you all dry, everywhere? Yes. Behind your ears? Yes. Between your legs? Yes. I blushed a bit. Okay, put these underpants on and then put the gown on. I looked over at the one-way mirror on the side wall where I had been observed during my transformation. No one's there, dear, and those windows are closed by shutters unless you're under observation for some reason. I checked. No one is watching you there. Okay. I put the underwear on under the towel anyway. Then I pulled the gown around me over the towel and let the towel drop when the pressure-sensitive tabs on the gown hooked together in the back of the gown. Then I sat on the couch and put on my socks. Once I was done, I went back to my hair brushing. Dr. Sandstrom's exam and visit this morning had been very positive. I seemed to be through the change completely, and any overnight changes he noticed were small. My knees had done a little change in my sleep. They were a little flatter, not knobby at all. He said my eyes were a bit lighter blue than yesterday, but I couldn't tell. My teeth had finally settled in nicely in shape and location, and all my vitals were a healthy, steady normal according to him. He said overall that my range of motion had improved as all the joints and tendons finished their final transformations while I slept. I didn't feel any pain or soreness when I woke up, so I could only assume that he was right. He said he would stop in later to check on me, but out of everyone in this group I had finished the fastest and was the fastest in recovery. He said I may see some of the others out and about in the hall today, but I shouldn't be surprised that if I didn't see them until the next day. Why are they hiding? I had asked him. I'm not. Well, he said in a tone befitting answer a child's question, you have to keep in mind that you again of the spirit of adventure of a child. You're not as worried about appearances or what other people think as much as adults do. You care, but you are more carefree. They are all a bit more self-conscious than you. I blinked a few times in response to his statement, trying to reconcile the fact that I hadn't noticed that I was acting more carefree and less self-conscious. But the more I thought about it, I realized that if I had changed into an adult female that I would have a bit more to adjust to and, probably, wouldn't leave my room until I had mastered things like makeup, hairstyling and dressing. As a kid, I didn't have to care about anything more than brushing my teeth and brushing out my hair. Yeah, I finally responded, I hadn't realized that. That's okay, it's normal. You will start acting like your new brain dictates, and your memories as David can't and won't catch everything that's different than what you used to do. You'll notice most of it, but not all of it. Is there anything I can do to keep my old memories alive and functioning? Well, after breakfast, Debbie's going to administer a short-form IQ estimator test and some other tests to jog your memory on events, places and people that you knew or knew of when you were David. Oh, fun. Hey, wait until you start 3rd grade in the fall. You'll have to pretend to be learning what you're taught, even though you already learned it 14 years ago. You'll be begging for one of our tests instead. He had smiled at me. No, I said with a grin, I'll be making money off the other kids by doing their homework for them. Oh, boy. I hope the Masons know they're in for a doubleheader. You're a looker and an entrepreneur in one cute package. My grin grew into a complete smile. Breakfast was in the lounge again, but there was no one else but Debbie with me. No one else had come out of their rooms yet, and I was a bit frustrated. Debbie, Deanna and the other nurses were nice, but I wanted to talk to someone who had just been through what I had been through. As I finished my eggs, fruit and cereal, I started to concoct a plan to make instruments out of things in my room. I would be a one-girl parade up and down the hall, calling my compatriots out to play. I'm sure if I asked for paper and markers to make signs, they would give it to me. I thought I had seen a bedpan in one closet that would make an excellent drum, and I'm sure I could find a cardboard tube somewhere to make my own megaphone. With the paper and pens, and maybe some tape, I could make a sandwich board to wear. I was even tossing around the ideas of a big paper hat that said, "Come out, chickens." What are you plotting over there, Allison? Debbie was eyeing me across the table. Why do you say that? Because you've got that look on your face. What look? You don't even know me that well to know my look. I know kids well enough to know that look. That's what I know. Are you plotting ways to get the others out of their rooms? Hey! What, are you going to pull the fire alarm? I felt my eyes get larger at the idea. Debbie, that's a great idea. I bounced in my nice padded chair. Hold on, Missy. I would lose my job if you did that and they found out I suggested it. Besides, give these people a break. Just because you're doing so well, doesn't mean everyone else is. Some people have regrets after this is done. I was swinging my feet under my chair. Why? Isn't this what they wanted? Didn't they go through all the tests that I did with the psychologists? Well, sure. But, sweetie, there is such a thing as buyer's remorse. And, as my uncle always told me, you need to keep your eye on the prize in life. I could feel my little brow furrow. How does that expression apply to the other people? As my uncle explained it, most people take that phrase to mean keep your eye on the prize as you fight to get it, so you always remember what you're fighting for. You know, like a motivator. That's what you were thinking, right? Right. Well, my uncle saw it differently. He said, you need to keep your eye on the prize for 2 reasons. 1, as you fight to get closer to the prize, you may see that it's not really what you thought it was from afar, and 2, sometimes the struggle and the fight to reach that prize changes you. By the time you get there, you may not want that prize anymore. So keep checking to make sure it's what you thought it was, and that you still want it. I realized then that part of me understood what she meant, but that part of me was having a problem synthesizing that information. I knew I'd be taking a step back in brain development, and that abstract reasoning might be a bit of a problem for me since my brain was 8. It felt that my memory of how I should be able to think of things was fighting my brain's ability to do so. I kind of understood, and I nodded my head, though unsure my expression belied my true state of mental battle. I looked up at her. Do I have to take the IQ tests? I don't feel up to it. I feel like I'm going to have some problems. My stomach was in knots, and I felt like I wanted to go back to bed and mope under the covers. Sweetie, Debbie reached across the table and took my hand. It's just to assess where you are and make sure that everything is normal. With what you already know, you will blow other 8-year-olds out of the water. You will always be the smart one in your class, and the fact that you already remember abstract concepts will probably force your brain to be able to process new ones faster as well as it develops. It's going to be fine. Okay. I agreed begrudgingly. I picked up my plate, cup and silverware and brought them to the cart they had been wheeled in on. Debbie was right behind me with her items. I turned to look at her. But if I get a low IQ score, I'm not leaving my room until I have to move downstairs. I folded my arms over my chest and stood resolutely in her way. Sweetie, you'll be fine. Now let me put my dishes away, please, and we'll get started. I looked up at her, unflinchingly for a moment, and then stepped aside and put my arms down. She put her dishes down and turned to me. Now, what's the attitude all of a sudden, little miss? I dunno. I really don't. I feel mad because I feel like I'm being forced into this test, but I don't know why. David just used to do whatever his teachers, other parents, bosses, authority figures, and mother told him. She smiled at me. Welcome to finding out your new personality. Now, if you can temper this willful personality with memories of David's pliant personality, you might find a nice balance. But you have to learn to recognize these new feelings and control them. I looked up at her with all seriousness. Can we paint my toenails tonight? By the time I finished taking the visual part of the IQ test on a health tab, I bored out of my mind. I was actually excited when Debbie began the verbal part with me. The questions were similar types to those I had just answered, but it was to test my auditory memory and comprehension skills. It was easy. I got bored again, laid down at the head of the bed. But I put myself in the opposite direction intended, so I could put my feet up on the wall and admire them and my legs. In school you will have to pay attention, you know, Debbie said to me. I know, I'm just still fascinated by me. By the time school starts, I'm sure I'll be used to my body. I just like my legs and feet. They're cute. Be that as it may, you need to sit up the right way. Why? You know why. You were an adult before. But I'm not now, I responded in a sing-song voice. Well, by age 8 you should be learning to sit like a lady. Now, please, do me a favor, and sit up. Oh, all right. I pouted a bit, but I didn't mean to. I was amazed that I was acting like this. The thought of having my legs up on the wall at David's house when he was a kid was unimaginable. His mother would have raised holy heck about how she didn't have the money to put up new wallpaper. She would have told David that he was going to have to get a job and pay for the new paper if he thought he was going to act like that. David just always bowed to her will, but I thought I might have a few choice things to say to her. I sat up and tried to stay focused, and was successful for the most part. When we were done, Debbie looked at me. "Well, for an 8-year-old, you're a genius." "Good. Now can we please do something fun? Can I try on some clothes?" "Not yet, dear. How about video games? That way you can be in the lounge in case one of the others comes out of their rooms." "Do the game stations have Dialt Soldier on them?" Debbie laughed. "Of course." I practically flew down the hall to the lounge ahead of Debbie, enjoying the feel of my little soft feet on the floor. I burst into the room to find a handsome black man in his 20s, dressed in a hospital gown, sitting at one of the terminals playing Dialt Soldier 3D. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Marlon?" I could hear the surprise in my own voice. "Is that you?" He paused the game and turned around and spoke with a nice smooth baritone voice. Yes it is. "And you are Dav? No, excuse me, Allison, right?" I ran across the room and threw myself in his lap, hugging him around his chest. "Oh my gosh, it's so good to see someone else. I've been out of my room since yesterday. I was afraid the rest of you were never going to come out." He put a strong hand on my back, which felt nice. "Yeah, well, I'd say you're going to be the prettiest of us all. I can see why you had no fear." I looked up at him. "No way, you're totally cute. You look like a young Taye Diggs." He laughed. "Do I now, little girl? Well, you want to play Dialt Soldier with me?" I nodded excitedly and hopped off his lap. I took a seat at the other station, took up the controller and joined his game. Dialt Soldier was a video game created by one of the first Dialt recipients who was a programmer. He had worked for EA, and they had released it the first day he went into the Dialt clinic in Orlando. The game came out, was a huge hit, and then the programmer's new identity as a woman was revealed after her 2-week stay at the Dialt facility. This revelation of the programmer's identity made the game even more popular. In the game, to complete the mission, players must change their identities several times and get used to being treated as a different gender, race and age throughout the game, as well as the corresponding changes in ability. To get one key piece of information, the players must Dialt back to age 4 to fit into a crawl space inside a nursery school. But when they're 4, they have to deal with diminished strength, height, verbal skills and a tendency to get automatically distracted by fun things. My favorite part is when the male characters have to become female and flirt their way through situations. The game's database is online and constantly changing, so when you flirt as a female character you have to be very good at it. You have to use a speech-to-digital input program. You can't type in the flirty lines, you need to say them flirty. And when you're 4, you have to talk like a child and appear to make decisions like a child. Also, the game constantly changes locations. One week you could be on a mission to recover information on a secret society of college kids in Lawrence, Kansas. The next week you're playing the role of a submissive housewife in Iran, trying to get your husband's military secrets. If you don't do your research on a country's customs and religions, you will fail the game. And so, by the time I was ready to get my Dialt procedure, Dialt Soldier had spread worldwide and really opened people's eyes. I am not saying that there wasn't some resistance in conservative communities, but for the most part people were accepting that Dialt was a complete and utter change of self. Recently, a few Dialts had married some non-Dialts. Legally, we change our identity, so there's no law against us marrying. And at that moment, as I watched Marlon play alongside me, I felt like I would marry him if I were 15 years older. He was so cute.